Hello, everybody, and welcome to What If 2, the interactive war game brought to you by the Battle of Prestonpans Heritage Trust. I'm Aaron Johnston. I'm the curator of the Battle of Prestonpans Museum here in East Lothian, Scotland, and the game master for this campaign. Welcome to those of you who are new. I'll be explaining some of the outline of how the game actually takes place shortly. And for those of you who followed our previous campaign, thanks for coming back. I hope you're going to enjoy this one just as much as we did the last. Before our campaign gets underway then, let's take a moment to explore exactly how things are going to work. First point I want to make is that this is a game. It's a genuine game with no predetermined outcome. There's also nothing that we've done except to try and reflect the historical setup that decides to try and stack the odds in favour of one side or the other. There's no political motivation to any of this either. We've taken a moment in history that we here at this museum are interested in. We want to see if we can do things differently. So it's a genuine game. How long it runs, how many battles there are, how many videos I have to make, and who comes out on top, well, that's entirely down to the decisions made during the course of the campaign itself. So who's making those decisions? This time, our Jacobite army is going to be led by those who led the British army last time, and I might add, led it to victory. Brett Fletcher and Dave Smith, wargamers, reenactors, all-round good eggs. They're going to be leading the Jacobites, and this time they're going to be leading the Jacobites from the 19th of August onwards. So they don't have, as we did in the last campaign, the advantage of those few historical weeks already having been played out that have secured them a battlefield victory and some territory and a nice army to start with. They've got a harder challenge perhaps this time. Our British army, the forces of King George II, those decisions for them are going to be determined by our Facebook group. We've set up a Facebook group, What If 2 campaign, and I'll put the link in the video description and at the end of the video itself. I'll put it on screen. And that is the place where the polls will be made to determine what the British Army should do. If you want to get involved in the minutiae of the campaign and help drive the direction of the narrative, that's the place to do it. If you want to just enjoy the videos, enjoy the narrative progress of the campaign and the games that we fight along the way, then this is the place, because all of our videos and our updates will go here on the YouTube channel. The campaign rules we're using are very similar to those that we used in the previous campaign, with just a few small tweaks. There are a house set of rules that we've devised ourselves that will determine things like recruitment, speed of marching, and there are trigger points built in there that if certain objectives are met or certain events take place, then there are trigger consequences to them. I don't like to go into detail about those because I don't want them to drive the gameplay. We don't want to game the campaign in that way. The armies can move completely freely within the landscape. There are no node points that they have to move between or anything like that. So there's freedom of operational movement. And we saw in the last campaign that can lead to some very interesting decisions, and it can lead the campaign and the armies in completely different directions sometimes to the historical narrative. I'm going to be keeping track of everything at the museum itself with my campaign map, with my daily journal, and of course, as I said, I'll be sharing details as we go along. When the campaign determines that there needs to be a battlefield engagement, big or small, we will game that out on the gaming table, and we will use black powder rules, some house modifications to determine the outcomes. So that's how the campaign is going to take place. That's how it's going to run. We're looking forward to seeing how this campaign is going to play out, because this time we don't just have the historical reality to compare the campaign outcomes to, we also have the last time we ran the game. Now, by no means do you need to be a Jacobite history expert in order to enjoy what's coming in this campaign, nor do you in fact have to be a particularly committed wargamer. What we hope will emerge from the game is a rompingly good alternative history narrative that you can follow through some interesting landscapes, through some old maps and the recreation of those maps on the gaming table. We hope that you'll enjoy it, maybe even get invested in the outcome. But it is worth us remembering that the 1745 uprising was a genuine event, and it occurred with some pretty high stakes ambitions. So what was the point of it all? Well, in 1745, Britain was being ruled by King George II of the House of Hanover. That Hanoverian family had inherited the throne through some complex constitutional crises that date back to the 1680s. In 1685, Charles II had died, and his brother, James II of England, James VII of Scotland, had inherited the throne. But James was a Catholic king in a largely Protestant country. In 1688, the birth of James's son, and future heir, of course, to the thrones, raised so many fears of a Catholic succession that James was overthrown by forces who supported William of Orange. Now, that led to a Jacobite court in exile. Jacobus is the name for James, and therefore supporters of King James in exile are Jacobites. Now, they tried repeatedly during the course of the next few generations to restore that royal line back to the House of Stuart. 1745, as it turned out in history, was the last throw of the dice. And so, here we have George II, holder of the British throne. There he is, as painted by David Morier at the top, and there he is painted by me at the bottom, ready for deployment should our campaign require him. Meanwhile, the main Stuart line continues to exist as a royal court in exile, first in France and later in Italy. James II and VII is succeeded by James III and VIII, the new king across the water, and James has a son in 1720 called Charles Edward Stuart, the Bonnie Prince of legend. And it's this prince that in 1744 moves to Paris because he believes that the French are about to use him as part of their growing war against Britain as part of the War of the Austrian Succession. He's 24 years old, he's inexperienced in war, but he's very charismatic, very driven, and determined to restore the throne of his ancestors. The French invasion plan of 1744 doesn't actually amount to much in the end through the combined efforts of the Royal Navy and the weather. And Charles Edward is sort of cut loose. The French don't seem keen on reinvesting in another failed invasion plan. They're concentrating on the war in Europe itself. But Charles can't go home because he'd promised his father he would either return with the crown or in a coffin. So he relies on the Jacobite networks within France, particularly the Irish in Brittany, and he decides to go it alone. Jacobite agents have advised him that if he comes in person, he might be able to raise 10,000 men if he gets to Scotland. Now, Charles is also advised that he needs to do it with French support, with French weapons, gold, and soldiers. He can't do that overtly because he doesn't want to tell the French king he's going to do this. He doesn't want to be talked out of it. So he comes with just two ships, the Elizabeth and the Dutaille. The volunteer soldiers that have signed up for the expedition think they're going privateering. Nevertheless, Charles sets out from Brittany, and it is not smooth sailing. HMS Lion of the Royal Navy successfully spots and engages the Elizabeth. Now, the two countries are at war, so they engage. The captain of the Lion has no idea that Charles Edward Stuart is on the smaller vessel and that this was the beginning of an uprising in the British Isles. He engages, and there's a brutal sea battle that lasts for hours. This is an amazing painting done from sketches drawn by the Royal Navy's captain, so a well-informed image. This is a less well-known version of it that shows our ships engaging as the Dutaille attempts to get through. And after the engagement, both the Lion and the Elizabeth are so badly damaged that they both are forced to return to port. At this point, Charles Edward could have cancelled his campaign, but I wouldn't have much to talk to you about, and so we're glad that he didn't. He pushes on, sails to Scotland, and then lands. And from that point, he has to raise an army. And this is the strategic situation into which Charles Edward lands. As I've mentioned, Britain and her allies are at war with France and her allies in a major European conflict, which means much of Britain's military resources are deployed on the continent. That means that there's a relatively small number of troops available in the Scottish context to resist Charles Edward. Lieutenant General Sir John Cope, a career soldier, is in command of them. I've listed them there, what he has as his field force available to him, which he concentrated at Stirling after hearing reports of Charles Edward's landing and false rumours that he's arrived with a large French force. Because we play our tabletop actions to black powder rules, we list our orders of battle in terms of the sizes required for black powder games. So you can see there, he's got 2 regular or standard-sized regiments of dragoons, 3 standard-sized regiments of regular foot, and 1 small-sized battalion of regular foot. So that's how we're listing. So General Cope has a small force. He is concentrated at Stirling whilst he awaits confirmation of the rumours from the north. And so that leads us to the first real moment of this campaign, the moment that the campaign begins. The 19th of August, 1745. The place is Glenfinnan, at the head of Loch Shiel in the Western Highlands of Scotland. Charles Edward himself, for the last few weeks, has been hiding out at Borrowdale, sending messengers around Scotland, inviting them to a rendezvous at Glenfinnan on this date. He himself arrives at Glenfinnan with just a small escort. He beaches at the head of Loch Shiel, and there he disembarks, waiting to see whether anyone will respond to his call to arms. Charles Edward arrives into a disappointingly empty landscape, and there are some very anxious hours that follow as he waits to see if anybody will respond to his summons. Then, with all the drama that such a great moment in history requires, the sound of pipes begins to echo down the glens. Soon Charles Edward can see the snaking columns of Highlanders coming to the rendezvous, first MacDonald's, and then eventually, much to his relief, the very powerful and influential Clan Cameron, headed by Lochiel himself, who had previously advised Charles Edward that without French troops he would be unwilling to risk his men. Charles Edward had done enough to turn his opinion around, and if Cameron comes, others will come too. And so at last, late in the afternoon of the 19th of August 1745, Charles Edward is able to gather his nascent army on a knoll overlooking Loch Shiel, and there the Marquis of Tullibardine, the Jacobite Duke of Athol, is able to raise the Prince's standard, and the manifestos and proclamations are read. To great cheers from the men, to the casting off of bonnets, the Jacobite army now exists, and our campaign has officially begun. But let's not get overexcited. We have to go back to the strategic situation and work out what exactly we're going to do about it. Charles Edward has a small army at Glenfinnan, but if he stays in the Western Highlands, more clans are likely to join him in the coming days and weeks. He also has, though, the threat of several Highland garrisons, strong forts built as a result of previous Jacobite uprisings that are blocking his path in the short term. He also has General Cope's slightly larger force down at Stirling. So, is Charles Edward going to try and break out of the Highlands and rush south on Edinburgh, like he did in 1745 historically? Well, that's over to our team to decide. And what about Sir John Cope? Is he going to march north, as he's been directed by the Secretary of State for Scotland, and nip this rebellion in the bud? Or is he going to try and hold out and consolidate in the south? Is he going to try and do both by dividing his force? That's all to be seen, and that will have to come in our next update as our campaign gets underway. If you want to get involved in the strategic discussion and help Johnny Cope make his decision, then the place to go is the Facebook group, of course, What If 1745 Wargame. Head over there. A poll will be going up very soon now that this video has launched. As I've said, the campaign is being fought in real time. There's no time to lose if you want General Cope to move. You can also follow all of the activities of the Battle of Prestonpans Heritage Trust on our website, battleofprestonpans1745.org. I hope you are as excited as me as we begin our journey into What If 2, the British campaign of 1745. I'll see you next time.